Welcome back to the XRHealth podcast, Therapy Without Limits, Real Conversations, Shaping the Future of Therapy. Today we're sitting down to have a real conversation with Yohu Okita, a qualified and esteemed occupational therapist. Yohu wears many hats and his achievements are astounding. Yohu has published over 30 peer-reviewed papers, is a PhD candidate at Swinburne University. Yohu is working as a visiting associate professor at Hokkaido Bunkyo University in Japan and is also supporting the upcoming Assistive Technology Conference as a committee member that will take part in Melbourne in November. But today we're going to be speaking about Yohu's PhD, which he is in the final stages of completing, and it focuses on the use of telehealth in the treatment of chronic pain. And we're very excited to delve deeper into this topic with you, Yohu. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So for listeners who may not know your work, how would you describe what your research focus is right now?
Yes, so firstly, thank you so much for having me today. So I'm really honored to be here. Maybe I can start with why this topic is personal to me. I was born and raised in Japan, and my mother has lived with severe chronic pain for most of her life. Growing up, I saw how much pain affected her everyday life. We lived in a regional city, and there was no pain specialist nearby. So when she needed to see a specialist, she had to travel almost 2 hours to another city. And that travel itself was exhausting and painful. So going to an appointment became a really big event for our family. And that experience made me wonder, what if she could access support remotely without having to go through that extra burden? Later, after moving to Australia and working as an occupational therapist, I met many people with chronic pain who were facing similar challenges. Then COVID happened, and suddenly many services had to use telehealth. But I also noticed that telehealth was being used in very different ways. Sometimes it seemed like clinicians were choosing the method they were most comfortable with, rather than thinking about what worked best for the client. So my PhD research looks at how telehealth can be used in chronic pain management to support shared understanding between clinicians and clients. And for me, the key question is not simply, does telehealth work? It's more about how can we use telehealth in a way that helps people with chronic pain feel understood, supported, and involved in their care.
Yeah, really, really incredible. And hearing about your lived experience as well, growing up in Japan is really fascinating. And I think working as an OT myself, drawing on those past experiences is really helpful in the therapeutic process. In my experience, and maybe Jess can speak to this as well, chronic pain is often misunderstood. What's something that you wish more people knew about the lived experience of chronic pain?
Yeah, so one thing I really wish more people understood is that chronic pain is not always visible. Someone may look fine on the outside, but still be struggling every day. Many people with chronic pain also experience the frustration of not being believed, simply because their pain cannot be seen. So I think we need to be very careful not to judge someone's pain based on how they look. Chronic pain is not just ongoing physical pain. It can affect almost every part of a person's life. Sleep, work, relationships, mood, confidence, identity, and participation in meaningful activities. But sadly, many people with chronic pain have had experiences where they felt dismissed, misunderstood, or not fully listened to in healthcare settings. So for clinicians, one of the most important things we can do is listen carefully, believe and validate the person's experience, and try to understand what pain means in their everyday life before jumping into solutions. Because the goal is not always simply to fix or completely remove pain, for many people, it's also about rebuilding confidence, finding meaningful routines, and participating in the things that matter to them.
I think that's such a good point, and I really speak to that concept of listening to patients. So it's a skill that you learn as a therapist, I think, and I think you guys can agree.
Mm.
And it's something that it does grow through your career of being able to stop and listen and really hear what they're saying, and also structure your interview so that you're delving into those topics that are perhaps a little bit out of the square,
Yeah.
looking at the other parts of their life
Mm.
that's being impacted by the pain. And I think that for someone who has experienced chronic pain, that is such an important part of therapy, is having that story heard. It is therapy, being
Mm.
listened to by therapists, being validated. I think that's a huge and important part of their recovery journey, is finding a therapist that will listen and will agree to understand and agree to take everything on board, all of the things that they share. And it's often a really long interview, like it's often a longer session than what you might have with a, someone who's in acute pain, for example, than someone in chronic pain. It's often a longer interview because there's so much history there, and there's so much areas of their life that's been impacted by that pain. But if we cycle back to the telehealth aspect, so telehealth is going to be mostly interview. So it's mostly sitting down and speaking. Of course, we can do some objective assessments via telehealth. But if we talk about that telehealth model with people in chronic pain compared to perhaps going into a clinic, what advantages can you see that telehealth bring?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier with my mother's experience, traveling to appointments can itself be exhausting and pain-provoking for people with chronic pain. Imagine you have been waiting a long time to finally see a clinician, but on the morning of the appointment, you wake up feeling exhausted and in significant pain. You still need to get out of bed, get ready, travel to the clinic, sit in the waiting room, have the appointment, and then travel home again. For many people with chronic pain, the whole process can be extremely draining. Telehealth can reduce some of the burden by allowing people to access support from home. Of course, preparation is still needed, but they don't always have to go through the physical and emotional effort of traveling to a clinic. Another advantage is that telehealth can bring therapy closer to the person's real life. For example, through video calls, clinicians may be able to see the person's home environment, routines, and practical challenges. That can make therapy more contextual and meaningful rather than only focusing on what happens in a clinic room. And different telehealth methods can offer different strengths. Video may be helpful when visual information is important. Phone calls may feel easier or less tiring for some people. Or email or text message can be useful for follow-up, reflection, or sharing information. So I don't see telehealth simply as a replacement for in-person care. I see it as another way of providing support that can be flexible, accessible, and connected to the person's everyday life.
I love a lot of the things that you're saying there, Yuho, especially around the like accessibility. And I think something that maybe people don't take into consideration is that travel aspect and that leaving the home environment, which is contextually so relevant when you're prescribing activities or routines or therapy modalities. When you're sitting in the context of someone's house via telehealth, you can really draw from their environment and incorporate that into what their therapy is going to be, which I think is a huge advantage of telehealth.
I wonder about emotion and mood too, about
Mm,
the
mm,
difference of someone who's in chronic pain. So their system is stressed because they're constantly in pain. It's very stressful.
mm,
So the difference in what their mood and emotional state might be attending from home than what
mm,
it would be like traveling to a clinic where it's all very clinical, white walls. They get
mm,
the
mm.
white coat syndrome where they're nervous and they're fluttery. And I wonder uh, whether that's come up in your research at all, Yoho, or is that
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. So that makes a big difference. Yeah. So yeah, if they access service from their home, then they can sit in their favorite nice chair, they can prepare nice tea, and yeah, some people feel more comfortable receiving the service from their home. So that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me personally, I've worked in environments where, I've brought a client into a simulated kitchen to practice ADLs. And
Mm,
I've also worked in community rehab where I've gone into someone's house and we've practiced making it in the context of their home. And those patients, where they're doing it in their own comfortable environment, do so much better than in a simulated environment in a hospital because it just doesn't
mm,
feel real.
yeah.
And the layout doesn't match what they've got happening at home, which is their
Mm,
most common environment they spend time in.
mm.
Tracking back to your research, Yoho, what are some of the main insights that you found from your research overall? Kind of a big question, so I apologize in advance.
No, good. So the main insight from my research is that successful telehealth is about much more than simply offering an online appointment. It depends on suitability, preparation, communication, relationship building, and choosing the right method for the right person. So one key finding is that we shouldn't talk about telehealth as one single thing. So as I said, email, phone, and video all create very different communication experiences. For example, email can give people time to reflect and process information. Phone calls can feel more accessible and less demanding for some clients. And video can support more visual and relational communication because people can see each other. Another important insight is that clinicians need to be more intentional when using telehealth. In face-to-face sessions, clinicians may naturally pick up body language, facial expressions, posture, movement, and emotional cues. But in telehealth, some of those cues may be reduced or harder to interpret. So clinicians need to actively check understanding, invite questions, summarize key points, and make space for the client story. And I also found that telehealth is not suitable for every person or every situation. So clinicians need to consider things like pain levels, fatigue, technology access, privacy at home, communication preferences, support needs, and clinical risk. And finally, telehealth shouldn't only be about what happens during the session. What happens before and after the session is also really important. So preparing the client beforehand and following up afterwards can make the session more meaningful and help people put strategies into practice. And some of my papers are still under review, so I cannot share every detail yet, but overall, my research suggests that telehealth can be very valuable as long as it is used thoughtfully and intentionally.
I think that's a really good point of the pre phase
Yeah.
before the
Mm,
telehealth appointment and then the post phase. So what's happening leading up to the appointment, prepping them for what to
mm,
expect, being in contact with them when the appointment's going to happen, how it happens, all of those things, the actual appointment, and
mm,
then also what happens with follow up. What are they going to do in the meantime? Is there an email that's sent? Is there a text that's sent? Does the clinician touch base with them that way and connect? I think that's all really a great
yeah.
point, and I think very relevant for our business model as well, because all of
Mm,
our appointments happen via telehealth. So I think that's a really good point, and maybe something that we can think of or think about as a company can we do that better? Is that being done well at the moment? So I think that's something that we can look into, Tim.
Yeah,
Did
I
you have
100% agree. And kind of taking a different tangent of what you talked about, Yuho, I think the pre-appointment, if someone comes into a clinic that you lose in telehealth, I think is a really important thing to acknowledge. I know, and I think most therapists are not guilty of this, but do this as part of their practices. You do that quiet observation when someone's in the waiting room when you're about to pull them through for an appointment, and you
Yeah.
lose that in telehealth.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like you're going in blind sometimes because you log into the
Mm.
call and you're like, what am I going to get today?
Mm.
And I think acknowledging that and incorporating that into your telehealth practices is a really key taking from this. And to
Mm.
think, not every appointment may go as planned. You can have as an OT or as a physio or as a psych, you can have the best mindset and plan going into an appointment. As soon as you log in, everything could change by the context of what's happening in that call.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely something we should look into, and we will watch what comes from your research. We're really excited to see what the results are and what further insights you might be able to share with us in future.
Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that, Yuho. But we're just going to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk about a different topic. So we know that you've been involved in research around robotics and technology assisted rehab in the past. So the question is, where do you see the biggest opportunities for digital rehab to improve outcomes and access for care in future?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest opportunities is extending rehabilitation beyond the clinic. Many people only see a therapist for a short period of time, but rehabilitation and self-management happen in everyday life. So digital rehabilitation can help support people between appointments, not just during therapy sessions. This might include robotics, VR, gamified therapy, wearable devices, or remote monitoring. These tools can support more frequent practice, feedback, engagement at home. I also think technology can make rehabilitation more motivating. When people hear words like rehabilitation or training, they may imagine something repetitive, effortful, or not very enjoyable. But digital tools, especially VR and gamified devices, can make therapy more interactive and engaging. I was involved in a telehealth project, supporting a digital health company that provides a wearable gamified device connected to an app. What really stood out to me was how engaging this type of tool could be for both children and adults. It showed me that technology can support motivation, repetition, and participation in ways that traditional therapy alone may not always achieve. But at the same time, I think we need to be very careful. We shouldn't use technology just because it's new or exciting. Technology needs to be clinically meaningful, accessible, and person-centered. It needs to fit the person's goals, abilities, environment, and support needs. So for me, the biggest opportunity is not technology replacing therapists. It is technology helping therapists and clients extend therapy into everyday life in a more engaging, accessible, and sustainable way.
I just have a question about the wearable devices. Can we just explain to the audience what that actually looks like? So was the person using that device, they wear
Yeah, so
some sort
they
of
wear,
sensor? Yeah.
yes, exactly. So the wearable device has a sensor, and the person needs to wear in their arm or wrist or ankle. And then when they move, the connected app shows that the connected app has a different games
Good
inside.
game.
Yeah, so when they move, they can play video games. Not video, they can play different games. So for example, they can uh, do fishing by moving the arm. They can throw balls. Yeah, something like that.
I'm really passionate about this area around digital tech and its place in healthcare, especially within the rehabilitation process. I often explain to a lot of parents that I see when they ask about the gamification of therapy and how, my child playing video games is going to assist them in achieving their NDAS goals or their personal goals or whatever it happens to be. And I always come back to like the evolution of technology. So, yeah, the origin of OT is basket weaving, right? We don't still weave baskets as a modality for therapy
Yeah.
because technology and research has advanced. This is just another tool that we are using. It's not a replacement for all therapy, but it's like a weight or a flex bar or a TheraBand or something,
Yeah.
physical. It's a
Mm.
supplement to that assists with people achieving their therapy goals. And I think we're seeing an increased use of tools like virtual reality
Mm,
and
mm.
wearables and remote monitoring, in pain management. What role do you think these technologies can play in supporting people more consistently between sessions?
Yeah, so with chronic pain, it can be really difficult to predict how someone will feel from one day to the next. So some days may be better with less pain and more energy. Other days may be much harder. One common pattern we see in chronic pain management is what is often called the boom and bust cycle. For example, when someone has a good day, they may try to catch up on everything they have not been able to do, such as cleaning, cooking, shopping, gardening, or other daily tasks. But then the next day, their pain and fatigue may become much worse, and they may struggle to do their usual activities. So, one important part of pain management is helping people understand their activity patterns and pace themselves. So this is where wearable and remote monitoring can be helpful. They can help track activity levels, movement, sleep, and other patterns between sessions. But the value is not just in data itself. The value is that data can support a better conversation between the person and the clinician. It can help them talk about pacing, flare-ups, routines, and what level of activity feels sustainable. And of course, VR can also play a role. For example, if someone doesn't have enough energy to travel to a clinic, they may still be able to engage in gentle movement, relaxation, graded exposure, or therapeutic activities from home using VR. But I think the key point is this. Technology should support the therapeutic relationship, not replace it. Numbers alone do not tell the whole story. We still need to understand the person's lived experience, goals, routines, and what matters to them.
I think that's also the point to be made of remote monitoring if available. So in like our company, our VR devices can be monitored remotely, meaning that there's data that's sent back to our platform that we can have a look at when they're playing, the duration. There's different data that we can pull from that. So I think for someone who has chronic pain, it's also a useful tool to show them where they've come from, to show them how far they've come. So you can show them from the beginning of the experience, this is how much exercise you were able to do, how many minutes you're able to do, and now here we are 3 months into your program and look what you can do now. So I think that's a useful tool for people with pain to realize their success, because it can be very slow and it can be very challenging and very hard to live with that pain. So having that ability to show success to that chronic pain population, I think, is really useful. But if we think about wearable devices and prescription-based assistive technology, so in the sense that it might be provided to that client and they are using it independently. So maybe, I'm not sure what the company that you have been involved in with the wearable devices. So the device is given to that client, for example, and they just use that device independently. Do you think that in Australia that we're moving towards that model so that people can access therapy essentially, or those devices independently at home?
Yeah, I think Australia is moving in that direction, but we are not fully there yet. There is definitely growing interest in digital health, home-based therapy, remote monitoring, VR, wearable devices, and digital rehabilitation tools. But access is still inconsistent. There are still challenges around funding, clinical evidence, training, digital literacy, safety, and follow-up support. For me, one important point is that prescription shouldn't just mean giving someone a device. It should include proper assessment, clinical reasoning, education, training, and ongoing review. Clinicians have an important role in matching the right technology to the right person. That means thinking about the person's goals, environment, abilities, preferences, and support needs. And I also see this as a global issue, not just an Australian one. Last year, I was invited to a hospital in India to provide education on telehealth and support the launch of their telehealth services. That experience showed me that many clinicians around the world are interested in digital health and telehealth, but education and implementation system are still developing. So I think we need stronger systems, clearer funding pathways, better training, and more evidence about what works for whom and under what circumstances. Digital health is not automatically better than in-person care, but for some people, it may be more accessible, more flexible, and even more effective. So I think the key is choosing the right approach that works best for the person.
I think that kind of recaps a lot of what you've talked about, Yuho, really nicely in the person-centered care aspect of things. In that digital health, while it's making leaps and bounds in terms of improvement in its application within healthcare, it may not be the right, therapy modality for that particular client. So I don't think digital health will replace in-person care. I think it's something that will travel alongside it. And for some people, like you said, accessibility, we have a lot of rural clients that live out in the middle of the outback that can't get services where they are, or the services can only see them every 6 months, which is just not the level of care that they need. But I think moving forward, what excites you most about the next 5 years in telehealth, digital care, and chronic pain?
Yeah, so what excites me most is possibility of more personalized care. When COVID happened, it was very difficult time for everyone. I am based in Melbourne, and we experienced one of the longest lockdown periods in the world. During that time, many services had to rely heavily on telehealth because there were limited alternatives. At the stage, the focus was often just on making telehealth available. It was more like, we need to use telehealth or we need to keep service going. But now, I feel we are moving into a different stage. The question is becoming less about whether we should use telehealth and more about how we can personalize it. That is what really excites me. I hope more people will have choices in how they receive care, whether that is text-based communication, phone calls, video consultations, VR supported therapy, remote monitoring, in-person sessions, or a hybrid model. I'm also excited to see more research and service design involving people with lived experience. I recently attended and presented at the Australian Pain Society conference in Adelaide, and I saw many studies using co-design approaches. So clinicians, researchers, and people with lived experience were working together to develop pain management approaches. So for me, that's the future of digital health and chronic pain care. More personalized, more collaborative, and more grounded in what people actually need in their everyday lives.
That's an awesome answer to that question. Thank you. And it makes me think about our telehealth provisions and the stigma that there currently is around telehealth for allied health. So thank you for supporting sort of that concept and particularly for the chronic pain population, but also others who might not be able to attend face-to-face sessions. I definitely think that for physio, that stigma is a huge barrier that we're trying to overcome, and make everyone realize that they can access physio from home if they wish to, if they wanted to not have to go to a clinic. It's possible, it is effective. Obviously, it doesn't involve hands-on therapy, but there's so many other things that we can talk about and discuss and work on and work towards goals. So it's really nice to have that support from you. So thank you for that. And if we just perhaps round off your current research, so your current PhD, which has been looking at those modalities of text message, email, and video conferencing in the treatment of chronic pain, where do you hope that your research makes the biggest impact?
Yes, I hope my research helps clinicians use telehealth in a more thoughtful way. Telehealth is obviously convenient, and that is one of its strengths. But convenience alone is not enough. Just because an appointment is online doesn't automatically mean it is accessible or meaningful for the person receiving care. I hope my research encourages clinicians to pause and ask, is telehealth suitable for this person? Would they prefer video, phone, or written communication? Do they need support to prepare for the session? How can we make sure they feel comfortable, listened to, and involved? I also hope my work helps people see telehealth as more than just a way to deliver a service. It can also be a space where clinicians and clients build understanding together. For people with chronic pain, that's really important. Many people have had experiences where they felt dismissed, misunderstood, or not believed. So, if telehealth is used well, I hope it can help people feel more heard, more involved in decisions, and better supported in their everyday lives. And I would also love my research to influence clinical education and service design. So rather than simply asking, can we do this appointment by telehealth? I think we should be asking, what does this person need? What communication method would work best? And how can we make this interaction meaningful? And ultimately, I hope my work contributes to more personalized, inclusive, and client-centered telehealth practice, especially for people with chronic pain.
I think that's a really nice way to wrap up this episode of the podcast. And some, I guess, some final thoughts from you, Yuho. If there's someone listening that feels stuck in their chronic pain journey, what's one message that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, your pain is real and you are not alone. Feeling stuck doesn't mean you have failed. Chronic pain can be a really long and difficult journey, and progress is not always a straight line. Some days might feel better, other days might feel much harder. That doesn't mean you are going backwards. And I think it's important to remember that chronic pain management is not only about reducing pain. Of course, we all want pain to reduce, but it's also about understanding your body, rebuilding confidence, finding routines that work for you, and slowly getting back to the things and people that matter in your life. Even small steps can be meaningful. It might be something like getting out of bed a little earlier, going for a short walk, pacing an activity differently, or simply asking for support. Most importantly, you deserve care where you feel listened to, believed, and involved in decisions. So please don't feel like you have to go through this alone. The right support can make a real difference.
That was a lovely closing sentiment. It gave me goosebumps listening to you say that, Yohu. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so great to sit down with you and have a conversation about all of the things that you do so well. And I just wanted to also mention that we currently have an application for chronic pain. So it's called Mind in Motion, and it involves graded movement, which means starting to exercise a little bit more. It also has pain education and CBT, which is mindfulness. So it's relaxation and meditation practice to help to reduce the senses and learn coping skills to do with pain. So if anyone is interested in our chronic pain application and experiencing VR therapy, then we're very happy for them to reach out and have a chat about how they might be able to access that. So thanks again for coming on the podcast, Yohu. It's been great.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.